Hi, and welcome to the first edition of BioStream 360. This is a program in which I go around natural sites in the state of New Jersey and surrounding areas and use those sites to cover and teach some principles tied to science. My name is Owen Ambrose. I am a biology teacher based in Montclair High School, Montclair, New Jersey, USA. And today, I want to show you some place that's pretty special. In fact, so special that there's really nowhere exactly like it on Earth. So that's where I am now. But before telling you exactly where that place is, I need to tell you why I'm here. Because it's the early part of the school year, in my classes we're covering some basics of biology. Those being tied to organic chemistry, how life is possible in the first place. And as we were having that discussion, a student mentioned that they knew something about one of these organic molecules that were mentioned to be very important to life. Now, a little refresher. Organic molecules are things used in making life possible. We tend to cover four really major ones, those being proteins, lipids, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids. When nucleic acids were mentioned, a student this year said, "Oh, I know about them." And I asked how, and he said, "Well, because they're DNA and RNA." And I actually became really interested in them when I was young, because I saw a movie where DNA was used to create dinosaurs. Now, I knew exactly which movie he was talking about, and we looked at some videos from that movie. You'll see that they're linked in this film right now. And we talked about whether that was actually possible. Can you take DNA from an ancient thing and use it to clone extinct species? So, onto the biostream. You have to do a few things before we start. Firstly, you're going to open another web browser, and you're going to open either Google Earth or Google Maps. I'll be asking you to look at certain spots as I'm going over this place, and you'll use that map service to do so. Another thing you'll want to do is open another web browser page and just leave it open. I'll maybe ask you to look up some images or other terms. Last thing I want you to do is look at the top corner of your screen right now. You should see something resembling a crosshair with arrows on it. That's going to allow you to use the 360 function of this video. So right now, as I'm setting up, you could play around with that 360 function and just get a view of the entire area that I'm at before I tell you more about it. Okay, so hopefully you've tried out the 360 function. Hopefully you understand how it works and you're ready to use it when I tell you to. So, talking about ancient amber. Well, in the first of those video clips, if you looked at it, you'll see that they visit a place in the Dominican Republic. They go deep underground. There's a huge operation where they're excavating chunks of amber. They finally find a chunk of amber, and inside of it, there is a mosquito. The first question, is that possible? The answer, absolutely. We find insects trapped in amber quite frequently, but most of those insects found in amber are from amber that's far too young to have been around during the time of dinosaurs. In fact, that mine in the Dominican Republic, that's from about 25 million years ago. That's long after dinosaurs left the Earth. However, where I'm standing right now, a strange place that seems like it kind of comes out of nowhere, this is an actual amber source with amber from the time of dinosaurs, just under 100 million years ago, during the late Cretaceous period. So I'm going to show you how I come here and dig for amber in search of insects. We have to cover a few things. This is one of those amber holes that gets dug in. Now, hopefully when you were searching around the area with the 360 function, you are actually seeing that there are many holes here where people have dug. This is one of the better ones, and what I want you to notice as we're looking at it is there are bands throughout it, these dark layers. Those dark layers are what we dig for when we come here in search of amber, and they're made of a matter called lignite. So lignite is carbonized plant matter from very, very long ago. It's not petrified wood. It's wood that instead of having its components being replaced by minerals, everything has been stripped out of it except for the carbon that made those carbohydrates building the plant in the first place. So we have actually a really good band of lignite right here. You can see this dark layer going through. And what will happen in a second after I set up the camera is I'll dig this layer out and I'll show you how I search for amber through it. I'm going to set the camera up. And that should be good. So, before I start digging, there are a few things I have to show you. This is my toolkit. I come here prepared with a pickaxe, UV flashlights, which I'll talk about in a second, my trusty jug of soapy water, and some drinking water. Lastly, I have my shovel. At one point, this hole that I'm digging at reached down to about 10 feet deep. I actually dug to that layer not long ago, and what I found is at that depth, we reached the water table. So, despite everything being dry up here, there is water, a lot of it, under the ground. And if I dig deep enough, I run into it, it destroys the entire hole. So, I filled that part back up and left it to where the workable area was. Before I dig, let's talk about what amber is and why it would actually be right here. So as I mentioned, in that Dinosaur movie, the amber that they supposedly used to clone dinosaurs was far too young to have dinosaur DNA. But again, at this spot, the amber is the perfect age. It's actually from what's referred to as the golden age of dinosaurs. Those iconic dinosaurs that you think about, they were alive at that time. So we have to picture this area at that time. You're going to go to Google Maps now, and you're going to look up two things. The first thing I want you to do is look up Kennedy Park in Sayreville, New Jersey. As you're doing that, I want you to think about how far from the ocean Kennedy Park seems to be. I want you to zoom out a little bit, and you should see a river that winds not far from it. Now, when I say not far, I mean it's within viewable distance of your satellite image. But where I am right now, the river is nowhere to be seen. What you have to understand is that at one point, the Raritan River, a massive river that winds through much of New Jersey, actually did come almost right to this section I'm at. And where I'm at right now was almost entirely underwater most of the time. So I'm standing in what's referred to as an ancient lagoon. At one point, this was brackish water, meaning water that's a mix of salt and fresh. And as we would enter wet periods, the marsh or lagoon would overflow, get filled up, and then as things dried out, the water levels would go back down. When you see the lignite layers, what you're looking at are layers of plant matter that got washed up and then settled between those wet and dry periods. So there are multiple of those layers because of multiple times where water levels rose and went back down. And as the time between them happened, those lignite layers would get covered with clay and other debris, and that's what caused it to get trapped under the ground. I've talked about lignite, I've talked about the ancient lagoon, but I haven't talked about why amber would be here. So the other thing you have to picture is that this ancient lagoon that I'm standing in had massive trees growing in the style of mangroves throughout it. So right along the water, there were trees growing. And that is massively important because without water present with those trees, amber could not form. Now we have to talk about what amber is. So, if a tree is damaged in any way, it releases a defensive mechanism in the form of sap. That sap is actually a pretty simple molecule. It's made of simple carbohydrates repeating over and over again. And some of the sap is almost purely sugar. It tastes sweet, whereas other saps are more thick and jelly-like, okay? In of itself, sap is two things. One, it's water soluble, and two, it is highly susceptible to oxygen. So if sap drops off of a tree and lands on the ground, it'll break down into nothing over a short period of time. However, if we're in an ancient lagoon where there's a mangrove of trees dripping their sap right into water, that sap lands in the water, it is completely safe from oxygen, and then, as I mentioned, gets buried in with these layers of lignite. You have sap that over time doesn't break down. And so those monomers of carbohydrate, the simple building blocks that are in the sap, over time polymerize. They go from single molecules to molecules that join and build more and more and more complex structures. That's what makes it so that sap, while it can break down in water and oxygen, turns into amber, which is fossilized, waterproof, and highly resistant to oxygen. So we have chunks of tree sap from almost 100 million years ago built in these layers of lignite. Let's dig up some. So I'm going to go down here. I'm going to find a nice band of lignite like the one I showed you before, and I'm very carefully going to plan out how to extract that band of lignite. You'll notice that I'm not digging straight into any side. I'm going to go into this one from the top, press in my shovel, and break it down like that. Make sure your camera view is zoomed down so you can see where my shovel is pushing, and you'll notice a huge chunk of stuff coming out. Perfect. And here's a nice cross section of that lignite. So you can see it's black material. Again, it's carbonized plant matter. Really about 95 to 97 million years old. And you'll also see that it's extremely brittle. So just touching it causes it to break apart. The amber is found within these layers. But you should be able to see right now that you can't really make anything out except for black crusty stuff. And that's where my UV lights come in play. So what I'll do is take my light and shine it over, and you might be able to see it right there. There's a little speck that shines brightly. Amber is highly reactive to UV, and in fact, when exposed to UV at this strength, it glows. So I go through, I look for any pieces that glow, and I take them out, like this one. Now this is a teeny tiny flake. There's quite certainly nothing to be found in that flake, but as I go through, I often find larger and larger chunks. And so I'll do that right now. I'll break through, see if there's any larger chunks. You could watch me, or you could zoom around, pan around, and see the environment some more. Well, there was nothing much in that chunk of lignite, but I'll use that as a teachable moment. You see, even though this entire area is covered with small chips of amber, much of it gets destroyed. And that's for a few different reasons. First off, as I mentioned, amber is highly UV reactant. So if amber was trapped at the top, at the surface layer of this area, either it's been dug up and missed or just stayed there from the time that it first got deposited, it's been hit by sunlight over a very, very long period of time. And so there could be massive chunks of amber right at the surface here, and I could walk around with my UV light to find them. However, the problem is, when it gets hit by UV for too long, amber denatures. So those complex molecules break down. And so instead of having a clear piece of amber that we could easily see through, we have something that's not too much more than a very light rock that will crumble to dust or just be a cloudy mess when looked at. That's why I have to dig inside, but you should understand at this point that huge holes have to be dug in order to really find anything substantial. In a follow-up video here, I'm going to go through a few things. I'll show you a few of the larger pieces that I found. I'll talk about what can be in them, and I'll also show you some evidence of the fact that this was an ancient lagoon and that this entire area was different from how it is now. We're going to go in a second, but before we do, I want you to do one last thing. I want you to make sure that you've really taken in this scene. And I want you to do that seriously. And I'll tell you why as I get out of this hole. I come here all the time now. And though it's mostly out of love and really obsession over finding amber with things inside, there's actually another reason. In the distance behind me, you may be able to see a bunch of houses. This lagoon extended for miles in that direction, but most of it's gone now. Beyond that, back there were the ledges of the lagoon. And so less than 20 years ago, you could come here and see massive clay outcroppings with huge layers of lignite between them. In those layers, they found fossilized leaves, evidence of exactly what kind of trees were here. They found bones. They found fossilized seeds. Now, it's been plowed over. Even behind me in that direction, if you look over there, you'll actually see a wall being built. And if we come here during the weekdays, we might see some excavators going through and doing work. So they've actually already started doing the work to develop this area and prepare it for building houses. This site, one of the very rare places where amber of this age can be found, will be closed any day now. So that's part of why I'm showing it to you. Because places like this won't exist for very long, as long as human need comes before the rich natural history around us. I'm Owen Ambrose from BioStream 360. I hope you've learned something, and make sure to watch the follow-up video to see what I found and what's inside of it. Can't wait to show you where we end up next.